Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today is a very special day because we just got a new interview from Palantir's Alex Karp. This interview was one of the better interviews I've watched in my entire life, not just of a CEO, not just of a founder, but of someone who is inquisitive about the world and someone who is trying to express their beliefs and ideas for the trajectory of what they could create that could one day change the entire foundation of how we do business and how we think about the world of business, given the product that they're making to transform businesses. This was one of the most amazing interviews I've seen in a very long time, and I'm going to break it down. Now, there were 4 parts of the interview that I thought were really important, so I'm going to be doing 4 videos. The reason I'm doing 4 videos is because I'd rather, instead of do like an hour-long reaction video, I'd rather have 4 highly specific targeted parts so you guys can watch the parts that you want to watch, and I'm going to be talking about the specific elements of the questions that were asked and the questions that were answered, and break down those answers. So there were a couple of questions that I really cared about. Some of the questions had to do with sales. Some of the questions had to do with how Palantir actually attracts and retains talent, and a lot of the questions had to do with how Palantir deals with its competitors. A lot of the things that I've been talking about on this channel for the past couple months now were kind of answered in this podcast interview. And one thing to note is that if you've been struggling with your conviction over the share price, if you've been struggling with your conviction over, why you invested in Palantir in the first place, what I got away from this interview, top level thesis, is that you're investing in people, not just the company. Because at the end of the day, a company is a group of people that have an idea and they're trying to execute against that idea. And when you listen to this is why founder-led CEOs are so important. This is not some cookie cutter Wall Street suit that they put as the founder of, or the CEO of Palantir. That just wouldn't work for this type of company. This is one of the founders of Palantir who's been here since the inception of it. And when you listen to him articulate his vision, and when you listen to him articulate the conviction he has in his vision, for example, when he says that our competitors have no idea what they're doing in the context of the products that we're building, you start to recognize, okay, I don't know if it's going to work out in 5 years, but placing a bet on this company to get it done would be probably one of the better, smarter, educated bets I did in my life. Because if anyone was going to do what they're trying to do, it would be them, and it would be this management, this team, this leadership. And I think it made me a little bit more excited and confident to hold the stock. So really excited to get into this podcast interview. There's going to be 4 parts. I'll link them in the description. Once all of them are uploaded, you guys can check out the parts you want. And I'm going to be giving my thoughts, my analysis, and my breakdown ultimately on some of these amazing questions that were asked and some of these amazing answers that were given. In this part of the interview, I'm going to be analyzing Karp's response to how the world is changing and what that means for Palantir.
We talked about how the world is messy. We both talked about it. The world is starting to look as messy as you've been talking about since I've known. What do you do about that as the leader of this company?
So very good question. I'll continue in a second. Basically, he's asking, look, the world is changing. The world is getting more complex. The world is becoming more complicated. So in a world that's becoming more complicated, more complex, and in a world that is recognizing that there are different events that they ultimately have to adapt to, and technology being at the forefront of that adoption, that is the whole innovation story of Palantir. Is that going to be good for Palantir? So it'll be interesting here to listen to what Karp thinks about the macro level economics and political events that are going on in the world and how that is going to directly impact the business prospects of Palantir.
The software products you would need to deal with a dislocated world would have to be able to manage data in jurisdictions which are no longer connected, maintain software products, a myriad of them that are in your enterprise, where you are dealing with jurisdictions that are, again, disconnected, where there's a low trust environment, so you couldn't just ship the updates, you'd have to have them be verified, where the physical infrastructure you're relying on changes daily, breaks, where you would need to be able to create digital replicas of what you're doing because the complexity of the changes are just much greater than what you expected, where your underlying software that you've been relying on basically provides no alpha because it's not actually built for that world, and where you have internal workforce and political issues that also just make your daily issues much harder and mean that you have to be able to understand where you are as a company along the production and sales and regulatory and all these things that involve running a complex company that's now being kind of in the middle of glacial shifts. So those are things that we've been working on for the last, call it, since inception, and are built into our products. And now,
so before we continue, it's a really good response there, and I want to analyze that, right? So the interviewer essentially asked him, look, the world is changing, and because the world is changing, what do you plan to do on it? How is your product going to adapt to that? Or broadly speaking, what does that mean for Palantir? And Karp's argument, right? Karp's whole entire response is like, look, and before I get into that, this is what it means to be a shareholder in Palantir. This is why most people are not going to get it. And if most people don't get it, then they're not going to participate in the upside of it. Because to be an investor in Palantir, you have to recognize that there is a modern problem that exists within businesses, which is that as the world is shifting to become more and more technologically savvy, more and more technologically proficient, more and more to the point where the pandemic accelerated the digitization of everything, that means more and more data is going to be produced. So let's just take, a regular car manufacturer. You have hundreds of millions of points of data from sales, from marketing, from supply chains, from finances that you have to manage. Like, it's not a joke. It's not just like you have like a little paper and you're accounting for all the things that happen. No, when you're doing hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue, even hundreds of millions, even hundreds of thousands, you have a lot of things you have to put into consideration in order for your operation to not only run smoothly, but for you to have growth in the operation, which is the key variable for every business to be successful. Like, are you growing at the end of the day? And Karp is saying the products that we are creating, the products that we are innovating, are adapting to the foundational elements of these businesses that don't even recognize how complex of a problem they have. So the more complex the world gets, and we saw this with the pandemic, right? Palantir was brought in by various governmental institutions to help distribute the vaccine because, they didn't know how to do it. They didn't know how to monitor it. They didn't know how to keep the data, internalize it, blah, 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 blah. And Palantir stepped up and solved the problem. So the interviewer is like, well, is there going to be more bad stuff that happens in the world? And Karp is like, yes, stuff is going to happen. Stuff that we don't even, like, there's not just like going to be just peace and kumbaya for the next 10, 20 years. A lot of different things are going to change, especially with the rapid adoption of technology. If that is the case, the only companies that are going to win are not only the companies that innovate, not only the companies that are at the forefront of the cutting edge of technology, but companies that recognize that things are here today and gone tomorrow. The AI of 2022 will be nothing like the AI of 2024, because in those 2 years, so much data will be produced. So many organizations will transform. So many potential macro level events could happen. We didn't know there would be a pandemic in 2020, right? Like in 2019, everyone was chilling. And in 2021, the entire world had been changed for the past 2 years. And new technologies like Zoom, for example, were able to emerge and completely shift the entire enterprise. So I think Karp's argument here is that our product is not only adaptable to the emerging markets that change, but our product is quite literally the only thing that is adaptable, or one of the only products in the market that is truly adaptable to how markets and the macro level economic conditions of the world and political conditions of the world and socio-cultural phenomena of the world will eventually change. And there has to be a technology that is undergirding all of those changes, integrated into your enterprise to help adapt and innovate your business with the changes that happen. And if Palantir can be that business, I think there's a lot of upside at the end of the day.
And so we've been on a journey to identify startups in between, could call it half grown up companies, whether it's in the context of, people building their company. We have Founders for Builders. We've invested in a lot of companies. We're going to continue to search for partners that can distribute not just our software, but knowledge of what it means when things are just dislocating. And how would you use software to do that? Now you could say, well, that's obvious, but actually it is a completely new world. There really are very few experts for what does it mean to do product maintenance when you no longer have access to your core data stack and when the assets are kind of at the edge of your enterprise and not at the center. What does it mean if you can no longer ship software to a jurisdiction? What does it mean if countries are in the middle of a near kinetic war for your supply chain? How do you get a supply chain to work if certain parts of it shut down? There's the software element where we know we have the right software products. There's the knowledge element, like how does a third party who's never really dealt with that challenge have a credible interaction with individuals that understand how to do that and then are opting for the best products on the market.
Okay, so that's the response I really, really wanted to analyze. There were a couple of things that he said. Number one, they're looking for more SPAC investments, right? So he mentioned Foundry for Builders, which is their ability to license their software to startups that are just emerging. A startup actually just raised $42 million because of Palantir's software. That was the Medicare data-driven recommendations platform. I did a video on them. So I think that's really promising, right? That they're looking for more partners that recognize the value of their data analytics platform and that recognize the value of integrating it into their entire enterprise from the earliest days, right? As a startup in the very beginning. So they're looking for more partners like that they can invest in, that they have confidence in, that they can actually use the software in a meaningful way to transform their businesses. But number two, and this is the real answer to his question, which is, how do you get third-party companies, third-party contractors, vendors to recognize the complexity of issues that emerge when things go wrong, when there is a kinetic war and there's supply chain issues, when your enterprise isn't adapting to the fact that there's a global pandemic, right? He mentioned COVID and vaccines. So he's bringing up all these examples of how their product, and he says at the very end, which will be ours, insinuating we have the only product on the market that can actually do this. We have the only product on the market that can actually adapt to every organization's new needs that they have as a business and new problems that will shock them as a business. And he lists a bunch of examples of these different problems. And there's a lot of conviction here, which is not just BS to me. I think there's a lot of conviction here that says we are the only ones that are building something, that have been building something for the past 20 years, that Microsoft, Amazon, Google, they can try to build it, but to intimately know, an organization's problems are very difficult. So if Palantir was to offer cloud computing right now and compete with AWS, that wouldn't make a lot of sense, right? Like it just wouldn't. AWS knows this problem. They innovated the first real solution to this problem, and then the rest of the industry followed. And they captured market share, even though there are competitors. And they print like $17 billion a year of revenue for Amazon, right? It's just a money printing machine. Palantir is like, look, there is a complex issue with how the world is going to be managing their data, how data is going to be siloed across the entire organizations, and when things go wrong, how that data is going to have to be integrated in order to keep the infrastructure of the institution afloat. Because when it goes wrong, a lot of companies die. And this is what we saw with the COVID pandemic. When you don't know how to get your supply chain functioning from A to B to C because of all these external macro political economic factors that are going on, you are screwed. And it's kind of like what businesses do now with consulting firms, right? They hire a consulting firm. Peloton just, they're stopping demand of they're stopping production of their bikes because there's less demand. And there's this joke going around that they're hiring McKinsey, which they are hiring McKinsey. And McKinsey's going to give them some stupid PowerPoint presentation of like how you need to change the unit economics so you guys can get profitable. It's all nonsense. Like imagine if Peloton had actually integrated a software like Palantir through the very fabric of their organization so they could know and understand if demand was going to stop. They could understand how much supply they had. They could understand all of the internal things that they need to do as a business to not go to the point where they are right now. I mean, these are the data-driven operations that cutting-edge businesses will have to have in order to have a competitive advantage in the next coming century, or the next coming decade. It's just inevitable. And Karp is making a very blatant argument here, which is that if we don't solve this problem, no one's going to solve this problem. And because we are the only ones that actually believe it's a problem in the first place, because like AWS believed that cloud computing was going to be a problem, that people needed a new way to host and share their data and store it in a place that wasn't physical servers. And they believed intimately in that problem in 2006, even though people didn't really know it was a problem. And by the next 4 or 5 years, they had transformed the entire industry. And I think Karp is really making that argument here, which is that the reason we're partnering with these SPACs, the reason we're giving Foundry for Builders is because we're letting these organizations have a taste of what it feels like to actually have a full stack of their data in one place and to recognize what they want to do with it. And right now, companies and organizations don't get it, but they're starting to get it. And when the world changes, when things like the pandemic happens and we are called on as the ones to solve these problems, we are the consulting firm that's going to fix everything, more and more organizations will recognize that the problem exists. So to answer the interviewer's question, is the world getting worse and is that good for you? The answer was yes. And not because we want the world to get worse, but because it's inevitable. Things are going to happen and organizations are going to have to adapt to the bad things that are happening. And because they're going to have to adapt, because supply chains are going to get wrecked, because there's going to be macro political events. I mean, Russia and Ukraine, there's a lot of stuff going on right now in a geopolitical sense. Or like if you're in Russia right now, there is a big question around how your business is going to operate given sort of the geopolitical events that are happening right now. Now, Palantir doesn't work in Russia, right? But so you got to think of that question. It's like if that's going to happen in an organization and they have a software that can actually give them advanced recommendations based upon everything that is happening in order to understand what to do, that is a very, very complex thing to create. That's why Palantir is so focused on product. But because they've created that and because they know the world will eventually adapt to that, It's just a question of if their product is going to be the product in the market that is going to be able to solve that problem. And that sort of answers the final question he asked, which is like, does that mean you go to the world or does the world come to you? And I think Karp's response is kind of both. We've searched for people in Foundry for Builders and SPACs that we can make investments in that believe and have the same vision that we have in terms of data driving the operations. But we also are letting the world come to us because the world has come to us. When COVID happened, and the NHS came to us and they recognized, hey, we had a problem and we were the only ones that were able to solve it. So this was a really, really good excerpt of the interview, and I thought it was very, very strong for Karp to sort of just like hone in on this idea of what a differentiated product approach means and what that truly does mean in the context of competition for that product at the end of the day. So those are my thoughts. More analysis on this interview coming soon. I'll leave the links in the description once those comes out. And let me know your guys' thoughts on Karp's answer. I thought this was a really good part of the interview. Looking forward to reading the comments. My name is Amit. See you guys in the next one.